Thank you. Well, including today, lawmakers on the Hill have just 17 working days to schedule before the November elections. They're short on time, but a whole lot of issues jockeying for attention. So will members of Congress be able to get anything done before they head back to their home districts ahead of the elections? Joining us for a look at the priorities and the reality of all this is Meredith Shiner. She is a staff writer with Roll Call. Happy you're with us today.
Happy to be here.
So we wanted to show, just to illustrate this, Eric Cantor's House calendar. And in brown, you will see until Election Day, just 17 days highlighted there. That goes through December, but just 17 days. So realistically, Meredith, what can get done in that time?
Well, as you might imagine, not that much can get done in 17 days.
Right.
I think if Congress really hunkered down and was able to try to push through legislation very quickly, you might be able to see a little bit get done, but 17 days isn't a long time, and I think you have people who are at home looking at that thinking, it's not even August right now, and they only have 17 work days left. And I think that leads to some consternation and probably an unpopularity of Congress. But they also have to be home and campaigning. I mean, this is obviously a very important election cycle, and Senate Republicans and Democrats are fighting to keep their chamber, and there's obviously a big fight for the White House. So I don't know exactly what you'll see done. Obviously, you'll see a few things talked about, perhaps tax cuts, perhaps deficit reduction.
Right.
But most things that will happen by the end of 2012 will happen probably in that segment of time between the election and the new Congress.
Okay, well, and that you hit on something that seems to be the big elephant under the Capitol dome is the tax issue, those Bush-era, so-called Bush-era tax cuts. How important is it that that does get pushed through? What happens if there is no movement on that come January 1st?
Well, I think the funny thing about this is you see both sides agreeing on extending 98% of the tax cut, right? Democrats want to see 98% of that tax cut extended. It's just for those top 2% of earners that they would like to see the tax cuts expire.
Right.
Meanwhile, Republicans would like to see all of the tax cuts extended. The way that they were designed to sunset. So they expired in the last time there was a lame duck in 2010. They were renewed by President Barack Obama and Democrats at their full strength. And so now you're seeing debate about those top 2% of earners. And Democrats really think that they can make a case that everyone should be, quote-unquote, paying their fair share, and that the higher earners should be contributing more. And Republicans will say, look, you shouldn't raise any taxes in a recession, and that those top 2% of earners, for them to have more money is to create a stimulative effect on the economy. And so it's this fundamental debate you've been seeing since the 1980s,
right.
And you'll be seeing it play out again, I think.
A lot of talk about that fiscal cliff. How severe a fall is that cliff, and might we get to the end and then not actually go over that cliff?
Well, congressmen have always really had a flair for the dramatic.
Yeah.
I think that they like having terms that, you know, sort of scare people who are paying attention.
I mean, you can literally see it. I can see it in my mind's eye, right?
They really enjoy that. But, you know, there are some issues that need to be resolved. You're talking about these tax cuts. The Budget Control Act, which was passed to raise the debt ceiling, so the nation's borrowing capacity, which we need to be able to borrow money to make sure that our government doesn't go into default so we can pay our obligations. They extended that last summer. It will need to be extended again. But part of that deal was to create $1.2 trillion worth of across-the-board domestic and military discretionary cuts in order to make sure that we were adding to deficit reduction. Now, you have a lot of people who are very worried about those cuts and who would like to see them replaced with something else, but you're seeing a fight that's been relitigated over and over again about where those cuts should come from. Democrats would obviously like to protect Medicare, social safety net type programs, but they also acknowledge that $500 billion worth of defense cuts aren't necessarily going to be good for the economy or for the military.
Right.
Defense Secretary Leon Panetta has said that these would be bad for the armed services. So there will be a large debate about how to replace those cuts, but the so-called super committee last fall failed to find a way.
Yes.
Negotiators between the president and the speaker and the majority leader failed to do that last summer. So it's a very, very tall order for them, and it will really depend on who wins in November and how the politics shake out and how those issues will shake out.
A lot to think about. 17 days to get something done, and maybe so, maybe not. This is Meredith Shiner. She's a staff writer with Roll Call. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Come back and see us. Tony, over to you.